Allow me to relate this to you as it unfolded itself to me. Going back to Oxford one day, and after I'd moved to London and had begun working at the New Statesman, I was striding down the High Street and ran straight into Yvonne just outside the Queen's College. We embraced at once. As I unclasped her, I noticed a man standing shyly to one side, and evidently carrying her shopping parcels. We were introduced. I proposed stepping into the Queen's Lane coffee house. I don't remember how it went. I was in Oxford to keep some pressing political and sexual engagements that seemed important at the time. The man seemed nice enough, if a bit wispy, and had an engaging grin. He was called Timothy Bryan, which I also remember thinking was a wispy name. I felt no premonition. My mother was very anxious to know what I thought of him. I said, becoming dimly but eventually alert, that he seemed fine. Did I really think so? I suddenly understood that I was being asked to approve of something. And it all came out in a rush. Yvonne had met him on a little holiday she'd managed to take in Athens. He seemed to understand her perfectly. He was a poet and a dreamer. She'd already decided to break it all to my father, the commander, and was going to live with Mr. Bryan. At any rate, I could tell that she was happy to be in the metropolis, and happy, too, that I liked her new man well enough. And I still have a rather sharp pang whenever I come to that corner of Shaftesbury Avenue, where I kissed her goodbye, because she had been absolutely everything to me in her way, and because I was never ever going to see her again. Do you happen to know where your mother is? For my father to call was almost unheard of. His taciturnity was renowned, and the telephone was considered an expense in those days. But call he did, and not that many days later, and came to the point with his customary dispatch. Well, he went on evenly enough, I haven't seen or heard from her in days, and her passport isn't where it usually is. I quite forget how we left it, but I shall never forget how we resumed that conversation. What it is to be 24 and fairly new to London, and cutting your first little swathe through town. I'd had a few Fleet Street and television jobs and gigs, and was lying in bed one morning with a wonderful new girlfriend when the telephone rang to disclose, as I lifted the receiver, the voice of an old girlfriend. Bizarrely, or so it seemed to my pampered and disordered senses, she asked me the very same question that my father had recently asked. Did I know where my mother was? I've never quite known how to ask forgiveness, but now I wish I'd been able to repress the irritable thought that I was getting just a bit too grown up for this line of inquiry. Melissa, in any case, was as brisk and tender as I would have wanted to be if our situations had been reversed. Had I listened to that morning's BBC News? No. Well, there was a short report about a woman with my surname having been found murdered in Athens. I felt everything in me somehow flying out between my toes. What? Perhaps no need to panic, said Melissa sweetly. Had I seen that morning's London Times? No. Well, there was another brief print report about the same event. But listen, would there have been a man involved? Would this woman called Hitchens, not that common a name, I dully thought, have been travelling with anybody? Yes, I said, and gave the probable or presumable name. Oh dear, then I'm very sorry, but it probably is your mum. So, the rather diffident and wispy ex-Reverend Bryan, so recently my guest at dinner, had bloodily murdered my mother and then taken his own life. Beneath that scanty exterior had lain a raving psycho. That was what all the reports agreed in saying. In some hotel in Athens, the couple had been found dead, separately but together, in adjoining rooms. For my father, who was the next person to ring me, this was especially and particularly devastating. I do not know how he bore the shock, but there was no question of his coming to Athens, and I myself, in any case, was already on my way there, and honestly preferred to face it alone. I was going through all of these motions while I awaited a bureaucratic verdict of which I was already fairly sure. My mother had not been murdered. She had, with her lover, contracted a pact of suicide. She took an overdose of sleeping pills, perhaps washed down with a mouthful or two of alcohol, while he, whose need to die must have been very great, took an overdose with booze also, and to make assurance doubly sure, slashed himself in a hot bath. I shall never be sure what depth of misery had made this outcome seem to her the sole recourse.
You said you found that she had put a number of phone calls to you that night before it happened.
Over the course of the day she was there, yes, the switchboard of the hotel showed several attempted calls. It was hard to do international calling in those days. So there was a record of, can you place this call? And it was to my number. And I was a young person then living in London, hadn't been there long, wasn't at home a lot, wasn't there. And I've always thought that if I picked up the phone, that yes, she would have had a handhold of some kind. And that maybe that's why she was calling. I mean, I just don't know, which is what makes it. Who knows what might have changed if Yvonne could have heard my voice, even in her extremity. I might have said something to cheer or even tease her. Something to set against her despair, and perhaps give her a momentary purchase against the death wish. A second-to-last piece of wretchedness almost completes this episode. Whenever I hear the dull word closure, I am made to realize that I, at least, will never achieve it. This is because the Athens police made me look at a photograph of Yvonne as she had been discovered. I will tell you nothing about this, except that the scene was decent and peaceful, but that she was off the bed and on the floor, and that the bedside telephone had been dislodged from its cradle. It's impossible to read this bit of forensics with any certainty, but I shall always have to wonder if she had briefly regained consciousness, or perhaps even belatedly regretted her choice, and tried at the very last to stay alive. At all events, this is how it ends. I'm eventually escorted to the hotel suite where it had all happened. The two bodies had to be removed and their coffins sealed before I could get there. This was for the dismally sordid reason that the dead couple had taken a while to be discovered. The pain of this is so piercing and exquisite, and the scenery of the two rooms so nasty and so tawdry, that I hide my tears and my nausea by pretending to seek some air at the window, and there, for the first time, I receive a shattering, full-on view of the Acropolis. For a moment, and like the Berlin Wall and other celebrated vistas when glimpsed for the first time, it almost resembles some remembered postcard of itself. But then it becomes utterly authentic and unique. That temple really must be the Parthenon, and almost near enough to stretch out and touch. The room behind me is full of death and darkness and depression, but suddenly here again, and fully present, is the flash and dazzle and brilliance of the green, blue and white, of the life-giving Mediterranean air and light that lent me my first hope and confidence. I only wish I could have been clutching my mother's hand for this too. She was the cream in the coffee, the gin in the Campari, the offer of wine or champagne instead of beer, the laugh in the face of bores and purse mouths and skinflints, the insurance against bigots and prudes.